The recent discoveries of children's remains in unmarked graves near residential schools in Canada have projected renewed concern regarding the overall treatment and forgotten history of Indigenous bands in North America. These ongoing discoveries place a harrowing spotlight on how public knowledge and records of the residential schools of history across North America barely scratch the surface of the agony suffered.
The residential school system really damaged all our people in Canada, and we're living it today. Right now, I get anxiety. Right, I'm trying to control my anxiety. There is a lot of drugs. There is a lot of drinking yet, right? And we're trying to get a hold of that, right? It's a big battle on the nations, right? All the nations. There's people sober and clean, and there's other people that, what I call them is a lot of them turn into ghosts. You could see them, but you can't hear them, right? They're so damaged from residential school.
Despite the varied history and treatment of Indigenous bands in Canada and US, bands across the continent view effective education and recognition of their cultures as necessities for true reconciliation.
I think there's really two things in the United States that we need to do as a country to honor Native peoples, and to do more than honor Native peoples, but to fulfill the promises and to make sure that tribal nations have the foothold that they deserve. One has to do with how we understand Indian nations in this country, what we understand collectively about the history, what we understand about the relationship between the United States and the tribes, but they're not interacting much with tribal governments, tribal officials, or even many people that are identify as Native Americans. And there's been generations in this country in which the history of the relationship between the United States and Indian nations has not been taught well. Now, some of it's because it's a dense topic, it's a complicated topic.
Evidently, Indigenous history education requires a complete overhaul to achieve credibility and accuracy. Many have cited the removal of colonizer statue and names, donating to Indigenous organizations, and most of all, education, as a way to become a productive ally and to forward Indigenous rights.
I do think that as a teacher, I can say that education needs to shift. We need to start working more within education across Canada. This is not an our school thing. It is a across Canada thing.
Compared with other countries in the world, New Zealand's Tiho Tahi Tanga program can be considered as an education model for other countries to consider.
Within their education system, every student learns Te Reo Māori, which is the one of the biggest Indigenous languages, and all teachers take a program or are put into this program where they're supported in this, but also told that this is an important part of what they're teaching, and it's an important part for every student.
A strong and truthful historical recognition and education is vital for minimizing the foreignness many non-Indigenous individuals feel towards Indigenous bands and cultures.
And I think that being immersed in a place where there's really monumental and authentic steps being taken towards including Indigenous language, including Indigenous story, including Indigenous history, including Indigenous truth within the curriculum. Coming back to Canada, even though we're making steps, it makes me realize that we are still a long way from doing it in a way that I think would be adequate and authentic. But I was just really shocked by how little I knew. And I went to New Zealand, and people in New Zealand knew way more about the Indigenous people of Canada and our colonial history than I did, and I'd grown up here.
The issue of authenticity is difficult to rectify as a large portion of Indigenous history has been erased. Events such as the Indian Act, Trail of Tears, ghost dance, and infamous residential school system are but several examples of how Canadian and American government attempted to control, assimilate, and remove the Indian.
History is, as they say, written sometimes by the winners. And the winners in so much of the history of the United States and the tribes has been the United States, if we measure winning by the taking of resources and the shifting of people from one part of the country to another, and the dominion over resources and even legal ideas like jurisdiction. So the writers of that history are not Native peoples by and large over the generations, over the centuries.
These ongoing discoveries unravel but only a small sector of the hidden horrors buried by these powerful institutions, begging consideration of larger issues.
The truth is coming out now, and they can't stop it. Believe me, across Canada here, that everybody needs to get to that point where they talk about what happened to them. And if they don't, nothing changes.
Regarding the current situation, Indigenous tribes are eager to continue to fight for their voices.
You know, it's up to the federal government. The nations across Canada here, I know, are ready to go to the table. And let's talk, you know, let's talk. Like I said, you know, all the nations across Canada are ready to talk. It's been too long, 150 years. Come on, I'm fourth generation now.
While some Indigenous nations continue to desire action and direct government communication, viewing it as an essential for true reconciliation, others are more optimistic and hopeful for the future.
But I think overall, to be Native in 2021 means at least we have an opportunity to do some things that our parents and grandparents were not really allowed to do. And that has a lot to do with federal Indian policy, which impacts tribes in this country so much. I mean, Canada and the United States have something in common in that foundationally they were nations built upon other nations. There are some differences, though, as policies have developed in both countries, but there's a similar theme in both countries, and that is a history of dispossession, removal from tribal lands, the damage that comes along with that. So those are similar, but I do think in 2021, we have some reason to be optimistic about our future.